Excuse me while I get all these out. I got a lot of them. You can see. Somebody likes trap fishing. Bros and broettes, one of my favorite times of year is here, and you can see what it is. It's trap season. So what we're gonna do in this video is, there's one thing, actually there's like 3 things I'm really good at. Deep crank fishing, trap fishing, and flipping. So we're gonna actually talk about something I'm pretty good at and I absolutely enjoy. And I'm gonna go through my exact trap baits, the exact colors for this winter time of year, because this through spring is when a trap absolutely shows off. But if you're not throwing the right one that has the right kind of vibration, the right style of vibration, you're missing out on a lot of bites, I guarantee that. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let's get to it. What is a trap? Well, I call them traps. Basically, they're rattle baits. They create a vibration as that water presses against the nose or that flatter part of the head, and they have a very, very tight, strong vibration in the water, and it's perfect for cold water fishing, pre-spawn fishing. I got a ton of traps. Let me actually show you my Bass Mafia box, dude. I'm a big believer in traps because I catch a ton of fish on it. It's something that we did in Florida a whole bunch. Guntersville is known for its trap bite, but a lot of times, like with anything in fishing, it's all about intricacies, little differences, little changes that really change your presentation and get you more bites, especially on a high pressure lake like Lake Guntersville. So I'll start with one of my go-tos. I actually got it out of my Monster Bass box last month, and this is one that I found last year. And basically, with Guntersville being so highly pressured, with the cold weather we actually get, you know, up until a couple years ago, I'd never experienced fishing in 30, 40 degrees water temps, in the low 40s and that. And the big trick is fish want something to react to, but they want it slow and they want it subtle, but they're looking for a hard bait. And that's where a trap fits in so well. We're actually going to talk about, I got my setup that I use right behind me, because the rod, reel, and line that you use is very integral in the way you fish this bait as well. But let's start with a couple baits and then jump into that. This is the Sergeant. Now, you're gonna say it looks like every other trap bait that I've ever seen in my life, and you're probably right. But what makes this one a little bit different is this right here. You notice how you don't hear anything? Actually, that's another bait wobbling. Let me do it again. All right, so you don't hear anything. This is a silent trap. It's a whole class of its own. Basically, there's no rattles in this bait. The vibration that you're gonna get from this bait is 100% reliant upon the way it swims in the water, the way it shimmies in the water. And that's been the absolute key to this thing. This silent rattle trap deal has been absolutely stellar. I don't care what lake you're on, if it's in Florida, if it's in Alabama, even up north, that subtlety of that lack of vibration. And I think there's also something to, this bait has a very flat front nose, as you can see right there. When I kill this thing and let it go back down to the bottom, it sits nose down, just like that, and then I can pop it off the bottom. One thing that you're gonna do with traps a lot is rip them. And this has a very subtle vibration when you're ripping it even. You'll also notice too, it has a very rounded back. All these traps rely on vibration created by them sort of shimmying in the water, and it's all created based upon this flat part right here. That's kind of what you describe, like if you got a bill with a crankbait, the crankbait dives off the bill. With rattle traps, they actually dive upwards, if that makes any sense, based upon this bill. The way they vibrate is because the water hits against that, and then that pressure forces them to shimmy back and forth. This bait, in comparison to every single other one that I'm going to show you, is the most rounded, most subtle sort of finish on the top. Thus, it creates a lot less, more subtle vibration, I guess you could describe it as. It's very much what you'd say is like a finesse rattle trap. If you have cold water, even if it's semi-dirty, but cold water where fish are not really reacting very well, but you're still getting reaction bites and you have to use a hard bait, this is an absolute go-to. And we'll jump into colors real quick too. Red has not been hot yet, I'll be totally honest with you, but come about January, February, red is the only color you want to be throwing. You might mix in a little bit of shad, a little bit of chartreuse if you get some dingier water, things along those lines. But red seems super hot when it's late winter, early spring. My buddy always talks about how the fish's eyelids, they're just kind of like closed. They got a little sort of film on their eyelids, and they can't see too well. And that red really shows up in just about any water clarity, even gin clear water. Red absolutely kills it. So the Sergeant from Thunderhawk Lures, that's my one one from last year that I absolutely cleaned up on. There's only a few 3/4 ounce traps that I'll use. Usually I'll use a 3/4 ounce in like 6 to 8, 6 to 10 feet of water. You can fish it down to 20 though. With this bait, it's a lot like a spoon where it's as deep as you want to fish it because the bait doesn't really have a bill to dive. It's all a question about letting it sink down to where you actually want to present it. And this guy right here, it's another naughty one. You'll notice no rattle once again. This is a Nishini. I don't know the exact name of it. I'll put links to all this stuff down in the description box at Tackle Warehouse so you can check them out, see if they apply to your water. But this is a 3/4 ounce, a little bit heavier, but once again incorporating a very rounded top. And like we talked about earlier, that creates a very subtle vibration in comparison to some of these other traps that I'm going to show you. These are early season traps. That rounded head, very light vibration, still gives off a lot of vibration, but much more subtle compared to the majority of traps. In this one, I can fish a little bit deeper. It's 3/4 ounce. I'll fish it in 6 to 8, 6 to 10. You know, I can bounce it off wood. It has a very subtle report. What's kind of cool with this one too is it has 2 different line ties, so you can basically present the bait a little bit differently. These line ties, and it comes with that little clip right there. If you can see, they interact with how deep the bait runs as well as what angle the bait actually runs and how much vibration you get with it. It's something you can play around with. I normally leave mine set right at that middle section right there where it's clipped on now. That seems to be the most universal functioning kind of clip on. But this guy, especially as we go into some of this cold weather that we're gonna see, you wanna have it tied on. All of these are gonna have a little bit flatter kind of head space or bill space that you'd call it on a rattle trap. So classic right here. And actually I have a few different versions of this. This one's kind of interesting. So this is the Booyah. This is the one knocker version. This is one of my favorite colors. I have no idea what it's called, but I absolutely tear them up in Florida on it. Now the big key with this guy is here it doesn't go, it just goes donka, donka, donka. So there's one big weight in there, thus the name one knocker, and it has a different sound when it's actually vibrating. You'll also notice this has a much flatter sort of plane on it. This one really gives off a lot more vibration. You're gonna feel this on the end of your rod when you're kind of ripping it out of the grass, stroking it over cover. It's a much more aggressive bait, not crazy aggressive, but that vibration with the single knock is definitely something a little different than your standard trap. Your standard trap, this is the exact same bait. This is a Booyah trap, but as you'll listen, you hear all the BBs in there? So this one has more of a high-pitched, multi-BB sort of traditional sound, which the majority of traps do have, but sometimes that is the way you want to go. I've found that's better as we get into sort of medium to late spring when there's a lot more shad around. There's shad that are spawning when fish are schooling. This would be more of my schooling bait. This would be more of my pre-spawn into the spawn bait when I'm catching those sort of fish moving up. You know, I'm looking for a little bit different sound, maybe not something as aggressive, but there's multiple different versions. So you have the one knocker, you have the traditional BB. You also have basically, that trap is a version of what's called the old Excalibur XR50, 75, and I think there's an XR25. This is the OG one knocker. This bait is actually worth quite a bit of money. At one point, it was actually white instead of yellow because it was new and fresh and not old. There is something to be said about these old school baits. The old one knockers, catch them. I don't know what the difference is between the old one knocker, the Excalibur, and the new Booyah version, but these guys are worth gold. It's the exact same sound, I think, but maybe the bass hear it slightly differently. But I do have a couple different versions where I have the XR50, the OG original version, as well as the new Booyah. So a couple others that I got. This is, the Red Eye Shad is actually, when it came out, it was probably one of the most sort of bust out lures there was. Kevin Van Dam designed this guy. This is just your classic half-ounce red eye shad. This is a newer version though. This is the two-tap, as you can see, it says it right there. The two-tap is just like the one knocker where it has that single kind of tungsten weight in it. It sounds a lot like the one knocker, but it has a little bit different sound to it. I know it sounds really stupid, but it does make a difference to these fish. It also has a slightly different sort of plane on the nose right there. This one does have a very aggressive vibration. This guy, you will feel at the end of your rod going drrrr. So it's maybe, you don't want to shy away from it too much in cold water situations. I've caught a bunch in cold water, but just keep in mind it is more of an aggressive wobble because of that plane. And then the one knocker, you know, it has a little higher pitched, a little kind of more aggressive sound, I guess, for lack of a better word. I love those one knockers, like we hit February, March or so. You're getting those staging fish. You got a little color in the water. You don't want to be overpowering to those fish, but you want some kind of sound to sort of call them up. And that deep sort of knocking sound, there's something about it that just drives them absolutely wild and causes them to react. So this is more of your traditional red-eye shad. And actually I grabbed this one just because of the color. We haven't talked much about colors. You saw I got some shad, some red, some have some orange in them. I'm going to show you a gold one in just a minute. This is one crazy awesome color. If you have slightly stained to super stained water or your brown tannic water in Florida, I have caught more fish in Florida on this guy than any of these traps. It's a little more aggressive because it is the red-eye shad, half-ounce version, but there's something about it in that brown tannic water, in that more stained water that just calls fish up. It's a blend of orange, black, as well as chartreuse. I don't care if brim are the primary forage or shad. This guy has done some work. So this is the Berkeley War Pig. You'll notice this thing is extremely small compared to the other ones that I've shown you. So this is a 1/4 ounce trap. There are times of the year, especially when these fish get ultra shallow in spring, that a 1/4 ounce trap, because you can fish it so shallow and so skinny, but still fish it fast, cover water, and it fishes like a trap where you can rip it, cause that reaction, rip it off the new grass that's coming up, is absolutely killer. Or you have clear water situations or very small bait. This guy does work. It's also very good in fall when you have so much bait running around and it's very tiny. So this is the 1/4 ounce. What's cool with the War Pig is it'll sit. When you let it go down, you'll notice the nose has that sort of little flat spot on it right there. It'll sit when it goes down and just sort of stand on the bottom. So you almost can worm fish it where you're popping it and dragging it. The hardest part is actually landing the fish because you can't change these hooks out to big old hooks. Otherwise, it really inhibits the action of the bait. You want to stay with the tiny hooks, maybe not the stock hooks, but your smaller hooks on it to make sure that you're getting the correct action out of the bait. The other 3/4 ounce that I use, this is actually an OG bait. This is the XR75. Booyah does make this guy still in the new Booyah like one knocker. This is one of my favorite colors. It's got that gold back to it. There's a lake in Florida called Lake Russo where I absolutely busted my teeth on a trap, dude. I caught so many 6 and 7 pounders fishing a 3/4, basically in stumps, in wood. I'd rip that thing, get it hung on a stump or pop it through a stump and rip it again. And dude, my old man actually caught one of the biggest fish he's ever caught on this guy out there. You'll also notice size comparison wise, this guy is much bigger than the Nishine. So it's a bigger presentation, a little more girthy, a little more aggressive vibration, a little bit better for running deeper or displacing more water. I got two kind of sneaky ones for you. This guy, if you go back a couple years, you probably saw me use this guy in the videos. The Aruka shad, just like in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, right? It's a little thinner, more subtle presentation, and you'll notice the body shape in comparison to, say, the Booyah is slightly different. Basically, there's some weird indentations on the head right there that you can see where it actually cups the water. A lot of people don't fish it. Spro's not super known, you know, for their Rattle Trap baits. It's sort of an off-color, different sort of approach. They have some great colors, including the reds for early to late spring, but it's an absolute killer, dude. It definitely has a more subtle return on it, though, which you'll have to get used to. That's the same situation you're going to find with the Thunderhawk Sergeant. They have a different vibration return. Like if you tie on a red-eye shad, throw it for 3 hours, and then you tie on the Aruka shad or that Thunderhawk Sergeant, you're gonna be like, dude, there's nothing on the end of my rod. You sort of need to acclimate yourself and get used to fishing them because they have a different vibration. But that's truly the key with all these baits is their different vibrations provide different presentations depending on the situation that you're in. Can't go wrong with gold, especially in Florida, right, boys? So this is the gold. I think this is the Rattling vibe that it's called. This one's pretty cool. Has a pretty standardized body shape. It has your flat bill. The one thing on this one is the flat bill is a little bit shorter, a little bit smaller, and a little bit more rounded than sort of your Booyah and your red eye shad. I'm not gonna say the vibration is subtle, but it's a little more subtle. These guys are all BBs too. They have some epically awesome colors though. When it comes to reflective patterns, the Ozuri has some of the best colors out there. So if you're seeing a lot of flash in the water, a lot of shad kind of balled up, flashing in the sun, definitely look at the Ozuris. They're absolutely killer, especially on like schooling fish, fish that are potted up on bait. They just sort of show the light better than a lot of the finishes on some of these other patterns. And that gold, that's an absolutely epic version of gold. It's tough to beat in Florida, like a black and gold trap, and this guy really does the job. So setup wise, what I'm throwing this on, usually I'm covering a lot of water, try not to break a rod tip. So I want a little bit longer rod. The other thing is too, this is crankbait fishing. You know, we're fishing a bait with open hooks, with treble hooks. So you need a rod that has some sort of parabolic aspects to it. It's got a little softer tip so you can actually fight the fish and not worry about them actually pulling off. This is a Halo 7.3 medium. It's actually kind of like their budget all-around rod. This is the XD3. The reason I like a medium is it has that softer bend to handle a crankbait. Another reason is too, a lot of times, like we talked about, I'm ripping this bait, dude. I'll reel it really, really slow, rip the bait. And you don't want a rod that'll overpower that rip. You want it to rip the bait, maybe rip the grass off the bait, rip it off the bottom, give it some sort of English, give it some action, but you don't want it to like basically tug it out of the water. You know, if you're using a medium heavy, if you're using a heavy rod, you're basically gonna pull that bait up from wherever it's at and pull it out of the water. The other weird thing that I do, and this is something I can't take credit for, I kind of figured it out a little bit, but my buddy Miles Murray sort of like told me that that's what he was doing. And once I heard he was doing it, I knew it was right. I'm running 12-pound fluorocarbon, not all the time, but a lot of the time, even on a 3/4 ounce. Does a couple things. Allows me to fish the bait a little bit deeper. I can take that 1/2 ounce and fish it a little bit deeper. I also think that action-wise, with those very low vibration baits, it allows me to get the most vibration out of the bait. And especially winter fish, as you go into early spring, water temps are usually low, they're pretty lethargic. Unless you're fishing around giant stumps with 8-pounders, you really don't need super heavy line. The fish aren't super agitated, their metabolism is pretty low. When you actually hook them, there's a decent fight, but it's nothing like catching schoolies in the dead of July. They're not all fired up going crazy. I do have it on a 721 Shimano SLX. That's a little faster reel. There's two main retrieves. There's a bunch of funky retrieves that we'll talk about once we get into season, but there's two main retrieves that I'm using with this. One, it's either super slow, and I can do that with the 721. I can just slow down and reel that bait. The other is that super slow. I'll feel it hang on something, I'll feel it meet the bottom, and I'll give it a pop. Maybe it's a big rip, maybe it's a little just pop with the rod tip, but those are my two main presentations. You can spoonfish this thing, you can do a million different things, and we'll talk about some of that in some of the upcoming videos, but those are your two main retrieves, and that 721 allows you to pick up that line after you've made that little pop, and I can always slow down with the 721. It's cold out, my hands are cold. All I'm gonna do is just creep that reel. I don't need a super slow reel, because the other thing too is a lot of times, for as cold as these fish are, it's amazing how they can take the slack out of your line, and unless you have a little faster reel like a 721, you're never gonna pick up and catch up to them and get a hook in them, because their mouths are pretty hard because it's cold. You need to be able to put some tension on them. Use that parabolic rod, that 7.3 XD3. But that's kind of my trap breakdown. That's sort of like an entry-level trap session to get you guys started. I'll put links to all this stuff at Tackle Warehouse. Literally, I've caught fish on every single bait that I've showed you, including some absolute giants, and I love this time of year. It's sort of an active sort of reaction, figure out that retrieve, figure out that cadence, a lot like jerkbait fishing, and tweaking it to get them to bite and to catch some of those big ones. It's also a great way to cover water in a variety of water conditions, from clear water to stained water to grass lakes to wood lakes, stump lakes, reservoirs. You can do a lot of different things with the trap. It's a super versatile way to catch fish, and it catches a lot of them. Hope you guys enjoyed this. If you got anything to add, drop it down in the comments box. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you back from the garage. We're back out on the water talking fishing.